Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician, a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 27 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing marriage. I've shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. So if you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in. I'm so happy to have Julianne Vaccaro here with me. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Thank you. We've just had an interview over on the Reclamation Project, your podcast, and I think this one and that one will be quite an amazing duo. I'm going to go ahead and read your bio. Julianne is a somatic sexologist, erotic blueprint master coach, quantum transformationist, and spiritual guide. Her innovative goddess approach methodology helps free powerful, purpose-driven women in their hearts, bodies, and sex to reclaim a life of pleasure, play, and possibility. She'll guide you into the deepest layers of your soul to remember the truth of who you are and reclaim your erotic power. You can count on her to remind you you can have it all. And let me just say, if that speaks to you and it's also intimidating, start with Julianne's Instagram feed, which will be this amazing introduction and also really deep calling in what she says in the bio about guiding you into the deepest layers of your soul and counting on her to remind you you can have it all. That's a bio that feels really resonant with my experience of you, which quite frankly is uncommon. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much.
So when it comes to grownups who've done the right thing according to society, their family, the religious institution, and they go to college, graduate, maybe they go to grad school, maybe they don't, they find their spouse, they get married, they've been doing the right thing all along, and probably have 2 or 3 children. And then they find themselves anywhere from their mid-30s to 60, and they've done all the right things, but it sure doesn't feel like they thought doing the right things would feel. And eventually, the inquiry that follows from that realization leads into the realm of sensuality, aliveness, and sexuality. And we really have an epidemic of couples who want to be having better sex with one another and really just don't know how and don't know where to begin. And one of the places to begin is to have a conversation. I don't think I've mentioned on the podcast that I'm working on a book to help you know how to get that conversation started. But once it's started, then I invite you to really explore your erotic blueprint, your partner's erotic blueprint, and what that's all about. And Julianne, I'd love you to introduce that. Tell us about the erotic blueprints and also maybe what it means to be an erotic blueprint master coach.
Yes, absolutely. And for my own integrity, it's outdated in my bio, so it's an erotic blueprint lead coach, just for that. the erotic blueprints are such an incredible framework. They really are. They provide so much permission and language and understanding for eroticism and for desire and arousal. So I'm excited to bring it to your people and your audience. The erotic blueprints I actually stumbled upon in the beginning of 2020, right before the pandemic hit. And when I found the body of work, it just really deeply resonated with me. And I'm sure, like so many of your listeners and perhaps you, there's just such a fascination with like typing and personality tests. And so the erotic blueprints can feel like that because it's a typing system. It's a way of typing the body and really mapping arousal.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, Gary Chapman has done an incredible job of making the 5 love languages something that's everyday and understood. And when it comes to meaningful connection with your spouse, the 5 love language does not hold a candle to the erotic blueprints, which were developed by Jaya. I met her first, I'm trying to think how many years ago, 15 years ago. And just the way that she's refined and developed, it's actually amazing to me that you encountered them in 2020 because you really honor them and embody the wisdom therein very profoundly. So I'm sure that's related to your biography and trainings and personal practice before them. But the fact that you're about to talk about them the way that you can, having just been introduced to them in 2020, let's just pause a moment and let that be both the celebration and the inspiration for anyone who is going to want to lean in as Julianne shares more. So please continue.
Thank you. Yeah, that touched me a lot. When I find something and when I found the world of somatic sexology, I just fell right in head first and never looked back and never kind of strayed because of how much it transformed my world. And it was home, like home in my body and home in the work and home on purpose. I will often reference the love languages when I speak about the blueprints, and I'm always like, it's like the love languages, and it's so much wider and deeper because it's such an in-depth, detailed, holistically inclusive system that takes into consideration all parts and pieces of who you are, which is so important, as you and I talked about in a sense on my podcast, like the holistic inclusion piece and really looking at all parts of you. Like, your sex is not separate from who you are. It can, and when does, is so amplifying to the experience that you have in your life, regardless of your sexual orientation or preference or how desire feels in your body. So the blueprints, there's 3 areas, I'll call them, within the system. And what I'm going to offer you today are the 5 blueprints, the body typing system that I've been referencing.
I'd like to interject something just to contribute to the context so that the incredible truth you're going to share lands even more deeply. So for anyone who's thinking about it, certainly you and I in our industry, but other people are thinking about it too. There actually was a recent article in The Atlantic that so much of what we as a society are learning about sex currently comes from porn. There's porn, and then there's also rom-coms, which portray what I would call more of a romantic, cutesy kind of sex. And it's very unusual that we imagine anything else, even when our body is directing us to explore and experience something else. We have in our mind what we've learned from porn and what we've learned from rom-com movies and maybe sex scenes in other kinds of movies too. And so as you listen to Julianne, if you have any resistance or thoughts, I really invite you to consider where that comes from. Because when it comes to sexuality, even though we don't see it really, we're still learning through imitation. And this is a whole world which is so real. And so if you hear something and you think it isn't, please just consider that maybe that position has been influenced by watching porn or rom-coms, which are totally inadequate to describe the whole erotic landscape. They describe a part of it, but this landscape is so much richer and broader. So go ahead.
I love the introduction so much and the big tease. There was something that was coming up when you were speaking, like it flew out of my brain. So what I'll say is, as I go through the blueprints, I want you to feel into your own body, like what happens in your system, what happens in your body when I speak about these things. What do you notice arise in you? It could be an opening. It might feel like a lot of heat coming in your body. It could also feel like a rejection or like oh no, a coldness could come in. It could feel like a trigger. So my invitation is for you to notice and for you to breathe into your body if you feel sensations arise, and to meet it with curiosity and a sense of neutrality and like, oh, this is information about my body. And this is me learning about what I like and where I may want to go, or where, maybe there's some fear or resistance. So, and if you've been listening so far and you're like, can she just get to the freaking description already? You might be a sexual, which is one of the blueprints. And, or if you're like, oh my God, this tease feels really, really, really good, then you could fall more into the energetic type, which is the first one that I'm going to go into. So the energetic is one of the blueprints, and the energetic is really, sensitive. They are so sensitivity is their superpower. They can feel the subtleties, the intricacies of everything. And so one of their superpowers is being able to have full body orgasms, but without touch. So no touch even needs to happen for them to feel that pleasure come rippling through all areas of their body. And with every single blueprint that I'll bring to you, just like any other archetype or personality test, there's some sort of superpower and shadow side. And so that's one way of looking at it, superpower or shadow, or it could be looked at as an accelerator or a decelerator, like what adds turn on or what turns it off. So for the energetic, the decelerator, the shadow side, could be if touch comes too fast. So if you're in conversation and all of a sudden your lover just wants to devour you and they go right for your goods, all of a sudden your pleasure could just evaporate away. And you're like, what the heck? I was just so turned on. There was so much flowing. And then he or they touched me there and I lost it.
So, and it doesn't mean you're a prude, and it doesn't mean you're a bad girl. It just means your erotic blueprint is energetic.
Exactly. It doesn't mean you're broken, your arousal is wrong, or why aren't you harder or wetter or more excited and aroused in this moment? It's so not about that at all. It's actually information about how your turn on works. And with all of these, it's again, it's information about the body and about your autonomy. How does your energy body also like to be touched? So
it's taking consent to a whole other level.
It really, really, really is. It really is. And the energetic, I feel, most of the blueprints outside of sexual are misrepresented in society and porn, like you've already mentioned. And the reason why they're so permission giving is because it gives name and language and words for the parts of us that have kind of been shut down or there hasn't been space for because it hasn't been shown. And because, our patriarchal society is about more and harder and faster and hustling, and that sensitivity and the emotionality of us, of the feminine, of that yin type, gets quieted away. So back to the blueprints. The energetic, to give you some felt embodied sense of what an energetic kind of touch would be. Like, how do you give energetic touch if they don't even need it? Would be a lot. It would be, I'll show you. So what you're going to do is you can take your arm, for example, and you're going to start with your opposite hand, like a foot away from your arm. And what you can start to do is lower your hand down, and you're starting to just notice with your bottom arm, like, when do you start to feel this top hand? Can you feel heat? When do you start to notice that sensation? And it doesn't mean there has to be touch for that sensation to take place, but it's kind of like touching into that energy body. So it could be hands off, like I'm modeling. It could also be really, really, really light touch, like just barely grazing the hairs on your arm. It's also really about anticipation and tease, which I referenced. Like, you energetics, I'm really teasing you with the description of each of these blueprints. They love that. Energetics love that. So the more space, the more arousal. Okay. The next one we have is the sensual. So the sensuals are delighted by all of the senses, like taste, touch, sound. It is all just deliciously scrumptious, and they want to devour all of it. When I think of a sensual, I think of like syrup, honey kind of movement in my body. Like, just, there's another reference. Alec Baldwin was in Friends once. And I always think of him when I teach about the sensual blueprint, because in the episode, he's like so delighted by everything. Like, wow, this fork. And oh my gosh, did you see that light bulb? Like, he just so in love with everything before him. And that really reminds me of the energy of a sensual, because they're just like, they can just touch anything and find delight. So I'm a big sensual. I have my cozy little blanket here with me. It's my favorite. You can really start to notice how people, their erotic blueprints by what they wear.
Yeah. And for the sensual, I also think of more traditional romantic gestures. So like rose petals on the floor and leading onto the bed, and candles, and a really beautifully shaped goblet for the champagne, which both tastes delicious and has this wonderful aroma. That kind of traditional expression of romance, really, it's not to say that everyone takes that in and appreciates it and is nourished by the beauty and gets turned on by it, but that those are the traditional romantic gestures.
Totally. Yeah. Yep. Like, music and the rose petals, like you referenced. Totally
Yes,
hear that. Like,
and
Valentine's Day is such a sensual holiday.
I don't know why Saturday Night Live has not done a whole vignette on the shadow side of the sensual, where, like, I don't know if you've encountered this, but the number of women who've told me, well, I can't have sex because the house is a mess. Like,
Totally.
the house being a mess really has nothing to do with the anatomical or physiological function of your genitals. But if your erotic blueprint is sensual, then just as all those lovely, lovely sense experiences can turn you on, their absence like locks down your erotic response, like passion in the face of an unmade bed and the shades half open, half closed, and some laundry on the floor. If that makes it impossible for you to relax into erotic deliciousness, well, that's a clue that sensual is your blueprint.
Yes, indeed. I always say the way that we show up in the bedroom is often the way we show up in every area of our life. And so what shows up there, it will show up everywhere, right? So like if it's challenging to let pleasure and ease and joy into your into your sex life, curious how easy or how challenging that is, you allowing that into your everyday moment, right? Like, where are you letting life in? Where are you letting love in?
It's such an important awareness, self-awareness, because it's often more inviting and more available to begin to really let it in everyday moments as you drink your coffee or sit on a bench and let the sun caress your skin. Like those are ways that are so significant, but less vulnerable than just aiming to shift this in yourself while you're naked and someone's waiting for you.
Less vulnerable and still equally as effective in some ways.
Totally. Yes.
And I say some ways because I think I'll reference something later on around sexual centers. But as you, Alexandra, just beautifully named, one of the shadow sides of the sensual is a challenge in moving from the head into the body. So like a crooked picture on the wall might totally have your intention, even though they're all over your body, right? And there can sometimes be that thought of like, what's wrong? Why can't I move into this territory? Why can't I get there? But that could be a sign that you're sensual. One of the superpowers of the sensual is that full body orgasm. So they're very resourced in the totality of their system, not just their genitals.
I feel like I want to interject something else also, which is that one of the really powerful, beautiful things about the erotic blueprints is it's not just recognizing which is your erotic blueprint so that you know. It's recognizing and understanding your erotic blueprint so that you can shift things internally and in your environment and in your communication in order to have more delicious sex. That's the reason. It's not just to know this about yourself and then there's nothing else to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All of this information to have a better, richer, wetter life. Ultimately, like deeper intimacy, deeper connection, and mostly to be able to get your needs met, to be fed, to be able to know what your needs are, and then to be actually able to feed them and to feel satiation. Like how many of us know what satiation feels like in our system? Not many of us, especially in the realm of sexuality. And so this framework allows you to really know like, oh, this is really what turns me on. This is how I can ask for it. And this is also how my partner and lover gets turned on. And I can really use that to build arousal in the space for them, which is going to build arousal for me. And it's just going to build all of this energy, right? And the bigger the release, the bigger the homecoming. So for the sensual to offer some sort of like touch skill, what is the sensual touch? The sensual loves full body touch. So like the more skin to skin contact, it's like driving around with your lover, just like feeling all of their body. So if you were to also give this kind of sensual touch to yourself, it would be lots of skin on skin. I think like how much of my arm can I use to graze and really like just contour my leg? And sounds also a really, really big tool of the sensual. Yeah. Mm-mm-mm. And then we have, I'll go into sexual. So the sexual blueprint is really what we see in our culture when it comes to sex. It is the things that you see in porn. So hard cocks, wet pussies, penetration, nudity, nipples, ejaculation, like pussy and vagina. Pussy and cock. That is what we think of when we think of the sexual. Their superpower is being able to go from 0 to 100 like that. So they can be walking down the street or in the kitchen and all of a sudden there's that drop in of desire and they are ready to go. So when Alexandra, you were referencing rom-coms, like this new season of You I just watched, and like when they're having sex, it is just like they lock eyes, there's the desire, and then there's just instant penetration. Like that is the sexual blueprint. And for some of our bodies really work that way. And some of us don't have that access or pathway right now. And that's perfectly okay.
And maybe it's important to say that these blueprints are wonderfully distributed regardless of gender. Because I think another thing, like, yes, we see that in porn, we see that in you, but we also tend to assume, unless you're one of many, many women who has more sexual desire than it appears that your heteronormative man does. However, in society, we think of men as having a kind of sexual flavor represented by the sexual erotic blueprint, but it really is distributed in all genders. We all might have any one of these blueprints.
Yeah, absolutely. These are so independent of gender expression, orientation, preference. And I can speak to like how many of us are each in this kind of a thing, how it's all distributed. The sexuals are simple, yet they don't lack depth. Like there's depth in them. And sex for a sexual is like the air that we breathe. It is a need. It's like air, food, water, sex. And so this kind of understanding, like, you know, in our podcast, we talked about blueprints and the way that blueprints show up in children. Like the sexuals, they love certainty. They want to know that we're going to fuck, and they want to know that there's going to be an orgasm, and they want to know that we're going there. Whereas an energetic or a sensual might be like, whoa, that's a lot of pressure. Like, give me some space, right? So these things are just so powerful to know about the people that you interact with, because it's not just about the bedroom. It's about how they show up and interact in everything. The sexual kind of touch would be more direct. So think more genital touch, like more nipple play right to your genitals. And vibrators are another tool and play toy that really falls in the sexual category. And then we have the kinky. The kinky is the fourth one. Kinky are all so fun. They all just they just hold so much. So the kinky, there's two types. We have the sensual type, and then we also have the psychological type of sensuality. So when we think of the first type, sensation, we might think of this furry blanket that I referenced. You might use a feather as some sort of play toy. It could also be chains. It could be floggers. It could be whips. It could be restriction. Sensation play, what creates energy in the body through touch. You can even use like energetic type of touch in sensation play in the kink blueprint, right? Where you're kind of like taking away the touch and then bringing it back in.
Well, I just was going to emphasize the way that you're describing kink. It's intense sensation. And when I bring up kink, I don't know how often I do, but when I do, usually people who aren't familiar just assume that kink means BDSM, that it means pain and it means inflicting pain or really getting off on feeling pain. And while that is very real, that is like one flavor of more flavors than Baskin Robbins provides in the expression of kink. So I just want to add that also.
Absolutely. And that's why I like to kind of go into the sensual, like the sensuality side, like the intense sensation, and the psychological, because there's different ways we play in that blueprint. And with kinky, like it's about playing in the taboo. Like what is taboo for you is really what it comes down to. If you're used to having sex in missionary, doggy style might be like kinky for you. That could be a total kink scene for you, or a kink session, right? So it's just more of like what feels out of the box for you, what feels a little taboo and on the edge and outside of your comfort zone.
Which is how we can be in a situation where someone can do something and it feels so straightforward to them, and someone else thinks that is just like so outrageous. But for the person doing it, it's actually pretty straightforward. And this is where the importance of taboo comes in.
So for the psychological piece, that's going to be more of playing with polarity. So you might play with, because you brought up genders, it could be gender bending. right? It could also be playing with light and dark. It might be playing with dominance and submission, in control versus in power. And none of those things have to mean pain. Like you said, so many people associate pain with kink. And sure, that is a fraction of it, but it's so much wider and so much deeper. And there's so much opportunity for healing when you're in a safe kink space and room to really meet different parts and explore different parts of you and the psyche and experiences. And also like meeting yourself as things arise in the bedroom. You know, sexuality is such a beautiful place for growth, and there's so many paths to enlightenment, and sex is one of those things. It's maybe the left-hand path, the road less traveled, but it's still a path there, and it's a way to meet new parts of you. And so in this exploration of your eroticism, like it's you coming home to you in all of these realms, even with what we're speaking to here. Okay, so kinky touch could be scratches. It could be slaps. It could be the energetic kind of teasing and then taking away. It could also be using different sensation items.
And the classic, I don't know if it dates me. I was born in 1968, but I feel like one of those classic things is kissing someone on any part of their body with an ice cube in my mouth. Like, I haven't actually ever done that, but that's like one of those things that somewhere in my teens I heard about. And that would be an example of a kinky touch.
You know, I am so not a cold girl, even though I live in Boulder, Colorado. And me and my partner were just in Costa Rica for a week, and we had a body sensation play night. And I was like, ice cubes. Oh my gosh, it's so hot here. And we played with ice for the first time, and it was one of my favorite things. And speaking of polarity, right? Like they kind of just blend together. The hot and the cold start to feel the same, and it all melts together. And it's like, well, if that's not the experience of sex, what is?
Oh my gosh, that's so great. Then that's why I said that, because I haven't thought about ice in that way. And, you know, since it was exciting and, you know, to hear about it when I was 20 or something. But yeah, okay, magnificent. So I guess I just want to summarize that we could also, I don't know that whether or not Jaya, the founder of the erotic blueprint methodology, if she does or she doesn't, but I'm going to say that learning more about the erotic blueprints is also a very significant path to self-acceptance, both self-understanding and self-acceptance. And I think you do so beautifully. It's one of the reasons that I wanted you to talk about this, Julianne, because I hope while you're listening that you heard some flavors that you know are you, or they might be you, but you weren't really sure quite how to be in relationship to them. And so my hope is, if that's the case, that your relationship to them is one of curiosity and willingness to lean in a bit.
And we've got one more. So the last and final one is the shapeshifter. And the shapeshifter, if you couldn't guess, is all of them. It's all of the blueprints in one. So they hold the energetic, the sensual, the kinky, and the sexual, which means that they hold all of the potential for pleasure, like all of those superpowers, and also all of those shadows. So the shapeshifter loves variety. Like they have immense capacity for pleasure. They have immense capacity for sensation and touch. They want all of it, all of the time. They could be 3 hours deep into a session and be like, we are just starting. Or they might have like 10 hands on their body and they're like, more hands, right? So the shapeshifter loves to play in all of it. They have the capacity to go into it all, which brings me back to one of the things that you spoke, like self-acceptance, and also how, like, this isn't about gender. The blueprints aren't about gender. A lot of us and a lot of people, when they first find the blueprints, do have curiosity, like, many men may show up sexual, many women may show up energetic and sensual. And I'm also so curious, like, how much of that is from our society's programming about what it means to be masculine or a man in the bedroom, or to be powerful or woman. Like, how much of that is embedded through our messaging and religion and things like that. But so many of us in the Blueprint community and Jaya really believe that we are all of it. Whether it's this framework or a different framework, like, we all hold the codes and the keys to this. It's just, where are we and where do we want to be and how do we also want to play? Like, for some of us, we might want to expand into all of these blueprints throughout the course of our life. And for others, we might feel really yummy in the sensual. We might feel really satisfied in the sexual and may never want to expand out of that. And that's perfect and beautiful and lovely. And I love this idea that we get to really play in all of it and kind of touch into all of these different pieces of us, because that's the homecoming that I'm speaking to, and the self-acceptance that I hear in you, like permission to just really be who you are and explore that and play in that.
I'm so appreciative of that attitude. I did a podcast episode a while ago called Beyond the 5 Love Languages, because I think it applies there too, that people get so attached to, well, this is my love language and this is my partner's. It's like, okay, if you're in a crisis, that's super useful. But if you're not in a crisis, let's expand our expression of our humanity and be able to give love in all 5 languages and more, and be able to really receive the love in all those different expressions. And I haven't really connected that so explicitly before with erotic blueprints, but absolutely, like, it depends how much you want to explore, how much you want to prioritize your human expression in the sexual realm, whether you want to try things, see what you like. Maybe there's a season, and then things are more tame again after a lot of experimentation, whatever the case may be. But I'm just imagining, I hear you, listener. I know what you're thinking. So I want to ask that question. What do I do when my blueprint is different than my partner's? So many of my listeners are in monogamous, decades-long relationships, or intending for that to be the case. They just haven't been together for decades yet. How am I going to be humanly expressed, genuinely nourished in my erotic soul when my blueprint is different than my partner's? So I'd love to hear your response to that, because I know it's a good one.
It is a good one, and it's a needed and necessary one, and a question that kind of upholds, like, yeah, this is one of the big reasons why we do blueprint work, right? It's for the self, but what happens after you come home to self? You start having awareness of how to relate better and differently to other. And that's actually one of the main things that we see as coaches, that I see as a coach, is opposing blueprints, or quote unquote, like, opposing blueprints, right? So many times I have couples coming in like, I'm a sexual and she's an energetic, or we're both, we're just like on the way it looks or feels for where they're at is on opposite sides of the spectrum. And my response to that is, well, so many things I could say. My response to that is that we are all guiding each other home, and we are probably in partnership with somebody because they are in fact different than who we are, and at the same time similar and the same. And I feel that partnership is such an arena and it's grounds for growth and exploration. And so I really truly believe that if you have a partner that is in the opposite blueprint than you, like, congratulations, welcome. This is the starting point to deepen the relationship to you and your partner, and to learn how to love each other better and wider and deeper. Because my sense is, and my curiosity would be like, how much of your own soul wants to know that other way of feeling and experiencing this human experience? And what a blessing to be able to co-create that in your lovership. Like, oh, you like to be touched differently. Let's play with that. And also, can I start to feel pleasure from that kind of touch? Can I expand what does turn me on and arouse me? Can I find arousal and a gateway to more happiness by just turning my partner on? And so I think that if you're listening and you're like, okay, I think I'm a different blueprint than my partner, I want you to know that that's exactly why this exists, because it can give you the framework to actually come into deeper intimacy so that it doesn't feel like a barrier. It is in fact an opening.
That's so well put. And I want to just like underline, bold, and italicize that by saying that every permutation has spectacular opportunities. So if you're a sensual kink with a sexual, oh my gosh, what's available is incredible. If you're a sensual with an energetic, oh my gosh, what's available is incredible. If you're a psychological kink with a shapeshifter, oh my gosh, that what's available is incredible. And I won't, talk for another hour just going through all of the different permutations, but in the context of the erotic blueprints, there's no such thing as sexual incompatibility. I'm not saying there's no such thing as sexual incompatibility. I'm saying there's no such thing as sexual incompatibility in the context of using the erotic blueprints and being devoted to your own growth and expansion and a willingness to lean in. The main sexual incompatibility is when there in one or both of you is not a willingness to learn and expand and identify your own experience more and really open with curiosity to learn how to love and touch your partner better. It's really like an incompatibility in willingness. And sometimes that incompatibility and willingness is the result of not having resources, not knowing where to turn for education. But if you've been listening to this podcast episode thus far, that reason is off the table for you, because in the context of erotic blueprints, when there's willingness and a devotion to the relationship and to both people's pleasure and the growth that comes with that, there just is no such thing as sexual incompatibility. And it is, whatever blueprint it is, a communication blueprint, an erotic communication blueprint, pleasure to converse with you. And there's so many ways in which you and I know we've just gotten started, even though this is one of my longest episodes in a very long time. Totally worth it. And I'd like to pivot, because every time I do an interview episode, because I so deeply believe that intimate relationships are the greatest ultimate vehicle for personal growth, I'd love to ask you, what have you learned about yourself as a result of being in the partnership you're in?
I love this question. I have learned, or I've been shown, I'd say, the barriers around my heart that still exist, the areas where I can soften and open to love more quickly while still honoring my experience and honoring the experience of my partner. That has been the practice for me.
I want to honor how tender that response is. I mean, you could have conveyed that content a lot of different ways, and that you chose such tenderness was very generous.
Thank you. It's truth.
So, for someone who wants to follow up with you, I've already referred to how fabulous your Instagram feed is. Anything else you would say?
Yeah, Instagram is definitely where I hang out the most. My podcast and my website as well. So the Reclamation Project, it's on iTunes and Spotify. And then my website is www.juliannevaccaro.com.
And those will all be in the show notes. I want to thank you so much for playing together in a way that was so generous and meaningful for anybody interested in knowing themselves better and up-leveling their marriage.
Likewise, thank you so much. It was a joy to be here with you and your listeners. Thank you so much for digesting it all with me.